Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are in Ruth. I believe that Ruth is one of the most beautiful stories of salvation that are in our Bible, next to Joseph. Ruth is amazing, not only because it is written after a woman, which is, amazing in and of itself. It's one of two books in our Bibles that are written after a woman, but it is written after a Moabite, which, if you remember the stories of the Moabites in Deuteronomy and God's warning to the Israelites, saying that no Moabite would ever enter into the Israelite camp again after what they did. This is a remarkable story. And to top it all off, she becomes or is one of the great grandmothers of Jesus. Jesus is in the lineage of Ruth. So this is a remarkable story. Now, something I actually learned recently is that Ruth wasn't written during the time period that it happened. It was probably written, it dates to Solomon's reign. And so it would have been a story that would have been told and handed down from generation to generation until it was written down and recorded as part of the canon of the Old Testament. If you remember, canon is simply the historical writings and the poetry associated with a covenant. So we see this story placed, here in the correct time period historically, but it was written sometime later. Scholars even believe that it possibly could have been written by Solomon's mother. Wouldn't that be interesting if that was the case? Now, this is the only book written after a Gentile. So just put all of that together and, we're already starting to see how this fits the narrative of salvation, where Jesus came into the world to redeem those under the law and to restore what was lost in the garden. He came to seek and save that which was lost. And what was lost? Well, what was lost was relationship. What was lost was mankind's view of God. Mankind lost themselves. And Jesus came as God, as God's only son. And he came to make a new covenant in order to bring us back into that relationship that was lost in the garden. So that's what this story is about. It is a picture of salvation. So the story picks up with a family. These were an Israelite family who ended up in a land they were not supposed to be at. They ended up in Moab. And I just hinted a second ago how Deuteronomy 23, God actually warned the Israelites. He made a law even to say that no Moabite would ever be allowed to come into the Israelite camp ever again because of what they had done. And what they had done was the Israelites had been enticed into idolatry and just orgies and all sorts of horrible pagan practices because of the Moabites. The Moabite women tempted the Israelite men, and they ended up in, major idolatry. We also see that the Moabites hired Balaam to curse them. So the Moabites were bad to the bone, and God didn't want them interacting because the Israelites couldn't help themselves and just kept being sucked into this pagan culture that the Moabites brought with them. So this isn't a land that this family was supposed to be in. They were supposed to stay put in the land that God had given them. And we see that they left Bethlehem, which ironically means house of bread, because of a famine. There was no bread in the house of bread. And so they went to Moab. And so these two sons of this family ended up marrying women that they were not supposed to marry. But again, we see the redemption of God in this story. So let's talk about the names of this family for a second. We know that Elimelech means my God is king. So his name declares something, but his actions said otherwise. Naomi means pleasant. We find out later that after her family died and she was left destitute, that her vision of God changed, and no longer does she see God as her provider. She actually has the wrong image of God and believes that because God is the one who took everything away from her, just like a female Job, that she was now embittered. And so she said, Naomi Mara, which means bitter. Her two sons, Mahlon and Chilon, means sick and pining. I know I said those names wrong, but fight me. Try saying those names yourself. Sick and pining. And Orpah means neck. And we see how she turned her neck away from Naomi back to her homeland. She rejected the God of Naomi. But then we see Ruth, and we see Ruth, who means beautiful friend, who she left her idolatrous life. She left everything that she knew. She left the pagan culture, and she made the God of Israel her God. No longer would she even claim the God of, her land. The Israelites' God was now her God. And because she did that, she became an Israelite. She was brought into the family. So you see, it wasn't God's desire that the Moabites not enter into relationship. It's that the Moabites kept drawing the Israelites away. The Israelites, they couldn't see God clearly. And so because they couldn't see their God, their provider, and honor God as God, and their hearts kept being turned towards these pagan gods, that God had to put some boundaries in place. And yet you see the actual opposite in Ruth's decision to abandon all of her gods and choose only one God and make that God her God. Complete different views of God. And yet you see that God honored her and her legacy, and she was brought into the family of Israel. Now, Boaz. Let's talk about Boaz for a second. Boaz is a beautiful picture of Jesus. You see that Boaz takes notice of this woman who clearly is not an Israelite because she didn't look like an Israelite. She also was poor. She probably dressed poor, but the most defining factor of her being poor was the fact that how she gathered her food. Boaz is the one that owned the land. Then you see that in that culture, based on Levitical law, whenever there was a harvest time, all the harvesters and the reapers would come and gather whatever was left, but they would leave kind of the worst of everything, the stomped on, grain or whatever on the ground for the poor. And so that the poor were the very last ones that would come and gather what was left, which usually wasn't a lot. And, it wasn't enough to feed them. Now, Boaz takes notice, and he finds pleasure in blessing Ruth. He finds out who she is. He finds pleasure in blessing her, and so he gives instructions to make sure that plenty of food is left behind for her to gather. Again, that's a picture of God's chesed love. God is pleased when he pleases us. He finds pleasure in our pleasure. And so you see that that's part of his chesed love. And this whole story is about chesed. Remember, we talked about chesed. It's a covenantal word that really has no words. It is all of faithfulness and goodness and, loving kindness, all worked out because of covenant. So God was always showing his hesed love to the Israelites. It's just that they just kept rejecting his hesed love. They weren't loving God and only God. They kept loving the gods of the lands around them. Boaz, however, shows us, he's like a human picture showing us what hesed love looks like. It's faithfulness, it's care, it's gentleness, it's looking after the poor. And so we see that here. Now, we have this picture of Naomi who kind of, like, she takes matters into her own hands. And based on her flesh, she instructs Ruth to go lay down at the feet of Boaz. Now, this was an act of, in that culture, it was like a proposal, marriage proposal on the act of Ruth. She was basically saying, if you choose to marry me, I will marry you. And so, you know, the hem of a garment, you know, we also call them the wings of the garment. We see the woman with the issue of blood who touched the hem of Jesus's garment. That it shows like the all-encompassing protection of somebody. She was coming under his protection. And so you see that in that act right there, that the God of Israel had fully become her God. It's a picture of us receiving the love of God. It's a picture of how, you know, God promised, you know, God's promise to us through his son that he would never leave, never forsake us, and us coming into that relationship. And so that's what this picture is. It's a picture of that. It's interesting because Ruth is a Gentile picture of what happened with Abraham, where Abraham was given this unconditional blessing simply because he received this love, chesed, that God had offered to Abraham. Where contrast that with Naomi, who ends up like a female Job, who responds. She is an Israelite already, but she couldn't see God for who he was. She saw him as taker instead of giver. And so Ruth, we see as a picture of a female Abraham. She is the beneficiary of unconditional blessing. She goes from poverty to wealthy. She goes from, you know, destitute to, you know, having a family. We go from cursed to blessed. So right there is a picture of the gospel. You know, Jesus reversed the curse at the cross, and Ruth is a picture of this, where she's no longer under a curse. She's no longer under bondage. She is now an Israelite who is generously being cared for. Now, in a human perspective, there was still a matter of, can Boaz marry Ruth? Well, we find out that he couldn't, because of one issue. He was actually in the lineage of Naomi. What's interesting is, you know, if you read carefully the, you know, Deuteronomy and Leviticus, you find out that there's a law in Israel that if a woman is married to a man and she didn't bear him any children while she was married to him and he died, then a next of kin could marry her legally. So that's what this is. This was part of that law. Boaz legally couldn't marry Ruth, even though he was a family member of Naomi, because there was one other family member in the way. There was a kinsman that was in the way that legally could marry Ruth. So he ends up, you know, like having this business deal. It's really, he tricks this kinsman really into giving up his rights to marry Ruth. the man had a right to buy the land, but when he found out that Ruth came with that land, the man was like, oh no, I can't marry a Moabite, I'm not going to do it. So that's why he forfeited his right to marry Ruth. Now, what's interesting about that kinsman, he is actually a picture of the law. He's a picture of the law. You see that the 10 elders were a picture of the 10 commandments, and the only thing that the law was able to offer was rules. You see no relationship there. It didn't lift a finger to help Ruth at all. And so really it was a picture of judgment. They were a picture of judgment. Now, because Boaz ended up like taking over the rights, you see him as a good, faithful kinsman redeemer who not only purchased the land, but he redeemed Naomi's story, he redeemed Ruth, and brought them into his wealth. That is a picture of Jesus. We see later on in Romans where Paul talks about this. It's a story of two husbands. You see a husband who was like an abusive husband, really, and then you see the good husband. That right there is a picture of Jesus, law versus grace. Jesus is grace. The law never lifts a finger to help us. It's a burden. It's like a husband who demands, and demands everything from a wife. You cook for me, you clean for me, you get up and you serve me, and it's never going to lift a finger to help you. And Jesus, on the other hand, says, no, you stay in bed. I'm going to take care of you. I will cook for you. I will take care of you. I'm just going to love you, and you just receive my love. So again, Boaz and Ruth are a picture of the chesed love of God being lavished on an undeserving and makes her absolutely deserving. Let's see, what else did I want to say about this? I think that's it. It's a short little book. It still took me 17 minutes to cover it, but I hope that you saw the goodness of God, the chesed love of God, and the faithfulness of God in the story of Ruth. So I'll see you next time when we cover 1 Samuel, and I don't think we'll cover 1 and 2 Samuel because it's too long, but we'll cover 1 Samuel. So we'll see you next time.